exactly what's in the book. We did example 1 in the book, so you'll have a little bit of time to look stuff over today. So you may want to look at that example if you don't understand what I'm about to do here. But in the book, they had us to do every function for both angles. Hold on. So what that means is we did the sine, the cosine, and the tangent for angle A. Then we did the sine, the cosine, and the tangent for angle B. So that's the only difference on the quiz is you have to do all 3 functions for both of the angles in the triangle. And you never do those for the right angle. You won't use the right angle for those functions. A sort of quick explanation of that is, if we tried to do the sine of C, what would happen?
The sine of C.
What's the formula for sine?
Which one's sine?
Opposite over.
So what's the opposite for C?
Hypotenuse.
It is the hypotenuse, right? So it'd be the same side. So it doesn't really make sense to be doing anything for this if the hypotenuse and the opposite is the same. And also then we couldn't really figure out which one is the adjacent. Is 6 adjacent or is 8 adjacent? They're both adjacent. So how would you choose adjacent? So can't really do anything with C, so it'll always only be 2 of the 3 angles that you do these kind of things with. So what's the memory trick to remember the formulas? Indian princess. Yeah, there's a story about it. Sokotoa. So for sine, what's the formula then?
Is it opposite over hypotenuse? And adjacent is.
And again, I will remind everybody while I'm doing this, please don't pull your phones out. Like if I turn around, I see a phone, there's no more warning. We're done. It's a referral.
The cos COS is adjacent over hypotenuse.
So for that, adjacent, so for cosine, adjacent over hypotenuse. So we can go ahead and write the formulas.
Opposite over adjacent.
And then tangent is opposite over adjacent, which we didn't have to do on this one. So now, for the sine of A, the only thing you have to remember is what? What did you tell me you thought you needed to do? It's relative. When we're doing this, finding the opposite, we have to look at which part of the triangle.
There.
That part you were right about.
For the opposite of
Yeah, whatever the angle is about. So when we're finding the opposite, we're finding the opposite from that angle. So opposite. Oh, and again, it took me 3 years to realize. Actually, only 2 because I only taught this one. We're looking for the side. A lot of kids, I guess, were thinking we're looking for they were thinking C and B were both opposite. It's not C or B that we're looking for. We're looking for the opposite side. So that is what we're looking for. Some of them were like, well, how do I know which one is the correct one, C or B? Well, it's neither. It's the side of the triangle. So I didn't really understand that until just, I think yesterday somebody said specifically what they were thinking.
We have our own personality.
Well, I don't remember who it was. I said somebody.
Okay.
So now that's the opposite for angle A. Now the hypotenuse we said we could label in the beginning because that doesn't ever change. It's always the side opposite of C. Doesn't matter if we're talking about angle B, angle A. Hypotenuse is always the hypotenuse. So that will be the bottom of both of the proportions because it's on the bottom of both formulas. So now for the cosine of B, oh, and if you convert it to a decimal, which you will have to do to do the new stuff we do today, we will need a decimal. Top divided by bottom if you're not sure how to do that. So 8 divided by 10 is 0.8. Now for the cosine of B, now when we find adjacent, we have to look from angle B. So what is adjacent for angle B?
Sine CB, the hypotenuse would not be.
It's also 8, right? It's not the opposite. Opposite for B would have been 6, but we want adjacent, so adjacent is 8. So it's the same number. The reason I'm showing you this is because that happens all the time. The opposite for one angle is very often going to be the adjacent for the other angle.
And we're.
So we got the same exact number for the cosine of A and the sine of, I'm sorry, the cosine of B and the sine of A.
And we were solving for the proportions of the A and B angles, right?
That's it. That's what you do on the quiz, right there.
Yeah,
Same thing you did in the example.
but that's what's for solving for the proportions.
Well, it's solving for the sine of A and the cosine of B. That's what it's solving for. But it is, those functions are just based on the proportions of the side. So
Why are we solving for it?
why are we solving for it? You're gonna find that part out today, Neo. Aren't you excited? I'm excited. I'm excited to tell you. So, the only difference on the quiz is you have to do cosine, sine, and tangent of each angle. But you just need to memorize the formula and then plug in the correct numbers. Any questions on that? Adjacent means like next to, connecting, like side by side. So when we talk about the angle here and we say adjacent, this is next to that. Now, 10 is also adjacent, but 10 is the hypotenuse. So we just label that the hypotenuse. That's what we said. They're two adjacent. That's why you never find the angle. You'll never use these functions with the right angle. So sine, cosine, tangent, you'll never use those with the angle that's the right angle. Because like you said, how would you know which one is the adjacent? They're both touching. So you wouldn't be able to do it. And the hypotenuse is also the opposite. So for that formula, you have like the same number for both of them. So you never do anything with the right angle. Although I think the sine of a 90-degree angle is actually 1. So you actually could do it. All right, so now get your book pages out, and I'll show you why we're doing that. Because there is a reason.
We're doing it because it's our quiz.
Well, there actually is a very real world, not that you guys, unless you go into engineering or architecture, you guys may never do this, but it is a very real world function.
We will use this in our life, in this classroom.
If you go into engineering or architecture, there's a good chance you'll use it. Now, the computers these days, I'm sure, do most of the work for you, but it's based on tangent, sine. It has to do with finding the... Oh, why can I not? No, but I do like that movie. That's an old movie. That movie's probably like 30 years old.
Finding Dory.
I don't remember Finding Dory as much.
Bro, what's your problem, huh? Wait,
Was it that recent? Oh, I thought they were a lot older than that. I don't know. It seems like it's been a long time. I can't remember exactly what page we're on, so just hang tight. Sometimes my... well, that was the problems, right? So we're on to the next lesson now. Oh, actually, no, wait. It's just the next lesson. That's what's before that. It's actually, I think it's before that. I don't know. We'll find out. It's example 2, basically, the example right after the example we already did, where we labeled 144. Yeah, 144. Turn to page 144. And we will learn why we learn this stuff. What are the numbers again for some of these? Like, give me a bunch of decimals though. 0.38 what? Something, something, something. Give me 3 more after the 38.
0.92.
Well, I need more decimals for that one too. 0.92 what? We round it off, which is fine when that's the end of what we're doing. But if we're going to do the next step, which I'm about to show you in a minute.
0.923076692.
307, is that what I heard?
Which page?
92307?
Yeah, which page?
144. What about after the 38? What's the rest of 0.38? Or 6 is fine. 4 6.
One little mess up. Okay.
All right, so We rounded those off before, but if you are taking the next step with these numbers and using them the way we're going to learn to use them today, the way they're the reason that you're using them in the first place, you have to have more decimals. You definitely don't want to round it off to just one decimal after the, I'm sorry, one number after the decimal. So you don't want to do the 10th place. You want to at least do the 100th place, but really you want to go past that, and you'll see why in a minute. So here's what I want you to do. We're just going to jump straight into using the if you don't have a calculator, you need a calculator.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
And tan J is 4.16 for 80.
Yeah. Yeah, you need it. Christian, can you grab a couple, please? Since some people are so. Do you have one, Ernesto?
What are you gonna say, Mr. Guy?
You have one.
What are you gonna say? Like chocolate?
Thank you.
Or
Hey.
peanut
I said thank you.
butter gallon?
Just now. Just now.
Yeah.
As you were cutting me off, I said thank you.
I didn't cut you off.
That's the lie, Mr. Guy.
Everybody else got one. Sonny's got one. John. All right. So these are now going to be like mandatory. You can't do the functions sine, tangent, cosine in your head. So nobody can do that.
Uh-huh.
I want you to type into your calculator. Where can I write this? I guess up here. So do the second function. Hit that button. Then you're going to hit the sine button. And it'll do a weird thing where it does sine, but puts like a little exponent of -1. Now punch in the 0.38461.
What?
The decimal that you came up with right there. 0.38461.
Aren't you guys? Aren't you guys actually?
You'll see it more so when I give you an example in a minute that I just make up. And then hit equals. Yeah, I don't think you have to close the parentheses.
Yeah, you don't.
Just hit equals, and what do you get?
Big number. Well, not big. Big decimal.
We'll stop it at 22.6. That's fine. What do you think we just did?
Calculate the angle measure.
We did.
Okay.
We just calculated for angle J, because that's the one we took the sine of, using the proportion. We took that proportion, that decimal, and we used a function that tells us based on that number, that proportion, that angle measure is 22.6 degrees. That's what these are used for. They're used to either calculate out the angle measure, if you know the sides, or if you know the angle, but you need to know the side, you can calculate the side when you can't do a squared, b squared, c squared. Because we could still do a squared, b squared, c squared if we had at least two of the sides, but sometimes you only know one number. So you might know the angle and then one of the sides, and now we'd be able to figure out both of the other two sides, even though we can't do a squared, b squared, c squared. So that's what these are for. There are some word problems we'll do in a minute that'll give you some examples of how you would use them.
Stupid.
Really quickly, go ahead, do the same exact thing for the cosine of J. Second function, cosine, put in the 0.92307, and then hit equals.
22.6 again.
You're not supposed
Again,
to say
because
it
we're
out loud.
figuring out J, right? So we better get the same number. So no matter which function you take of the angle, you better get the same number. Here's the tricky part. You've got to figure out which function to use. I don't tell you on some of the problems. Most of the problems. Based on which angle you want, and then based on what information you have, you're going to have to pick the correct function. That I mean, there will be probably one or two problems that's beyond, like, a little more difficult than just that. But that's the the main part. If you can do that part, if you can pick the right formula, you'll be okay on the quiz.
But you guys did that wrong.
And it wasn't a big deal in this one because we had all three sides. So this one wasn't a big deal, but when you're given less information, like you'll see when we do the next examples, you have to pick the correct function. Any questions on that? So
Yes.
the second function is what allows us to take or define the angle. If we just took the sine, actually, we'll do it in the next problem. That's fine.
Wait, Mr. Gill, I have a question.
What's that?
So this is, so the 22.6 is the proportion for the angle, correct? Or no?
It's not, it's the angle. That's the measure of the angle. We use the proportion to figure out what is the actual measure of the angle. Here, I'm going to make one up before we do that, just kind of a random one. And then we'll go to that word problem. All right, so let's say you have this triangle. Oh, boy, that was almost a good triangle. So close. And then let's say I tell you that. So now we have the angle measure. So we're doing the opposite. Have the angle measure. We want to solve, we'll say, for x, and we know that is 10. So again, we cannot do a squared, b squared, c squared. We don't have two of the three sides to be able to do it. We'd have two variables. So we want to use these new functions. This is where, again, this is that tricky part I was talking about. You have to choose the correct function to use. And you'll choose it based on where you have information. So if I'm using this angle, so I'm going to have to use the angle where they gave me the information. So that's the angle I'll use. What sides do I have relative to that angle?
The adjacent and the hypotenuse.
Yeah, so again, the opposite side would be this side. I don't have any information there, so I can't use a formula that has the opposite side. So there goes the sine function is out. The tangent function is out because they both have opposite in it. Right, so our three formulas really quickly. Sine is opposite over hypotenuse. Cosine is adjacent over hypotenuse. And then we'll write tangent over here. Tangent is opposite over adjacent. Well, I can't use the opposite side in this to solve anything. Well, I mean, I could solve for it if I wanted to solve for it, I could because I have enough information. But they don't. That's not what they want. So there's no sense in using it if I don't have a number there, and if they're not asking me to solve for it, there's no sense in using it. So I just want to use where I'm trying to solve. So that's my variable I'm trying to solve for, and then this is where I have information. So relative to this angle, I have the hypotenuse. That'll never change if it's across from the right angle, and I want to solve for the adjacent. Well, this is the formula then that has those two things, adjacent and hypotenuse. So that's the trickiest part right there. You just got to be able to pick the correct formula based on what you're solving for and what information you're given. So let's write down what the proportion would be. So what is the proportion I would write?
X over 10.
That is correct. So I should have called somebody for that.
Did you just
So
say
the
you
cosine of A, I'm sorry, I will say that's angle A. Cosine of A is X over 10. Because X is the adjacent relative to this angle, that's adjacent. And relative to that angle, 10 is the hypotenuse. So that's, I guess it is an equation. I don't have a lot of information. I got a bunch of missing stuff, but it is an equation. So that's the equation that I could set up.
That's not an equation.
Problem is, sure, if it's got an equal sign, it's an
Barely
equation.
set up anything.
If it's got an equal sign, it's an equation. So I have two variables really. I have cosine of A as a variable. Right now that's unknown, X is unknown. But using our new functions, we can figure out this part. And then we can solve, because then we'd only have one variable. I need to take the cosine because the cosine of A is also the same as the cosine of 30. I know what angle A is, it's 30. So everybody in your calculator, take the cosine of A. So for that, you would just hit the cosine button. Do not hit the second function for this.
Sure.
If you already have the angle, you don't need the second function. You use the second function when you're trying to figure out what the angle is. So say cosine, and then hit 30. That's what the angle A is. And you should get a decimal value.
0.8.
And this decimal value
Zero,
equals
zero.
x over 10, right?
Same thing.
Say more of them. 0.8 what?
6602.
5, 4, 0.
0.86602. Is that what I heard?
Yes.
Yeah.
So that is also equal to x over 10, because that's still the proportion that was the cosine of A. Now we can solve. So if you do the math to solve, you just multiply by 10, which makes sense because we know the hypotenuse is along a side, so x has to be a little shorter than that. So that's how you would solve for a side when you only have one other side, but you do have information about one of the angles. If I would have had information about this angle instead, then I would have done the opposite over the hypotenuse, so I would have had to have used the sine function, but you would have gotten the same information. So does anybody... So this is not on your quiz, like solving out using sine and cosine and tangent, actually coming up with a number. Anybody notice anything about that problem?
It's a 30, 60, 90 triangle.
So this is on your quiz, but you would solve it a different way. On your quiz, we have special right triangles. So in addition to just doing a normal right triangle, a squared, b squared, c squared, we said there are some triangles that have a special relationship. This is one of them. I could have solved that without doing all this sine, cosine stuff, because it has a special relationship between the sides. We said if it is a 30, 60, 90 triangle, the shortest side is kind of the one. The hypotenuse would be the shortest side times 2, we said. And then the other side, this side, would be the shortest side times the square root of 3. We said 1, 2, 3 were involved. So if you take the 10, how would you go from 10 to the shortest side? I'm going to call on somebody for that one. Let's see. Corinne, how do I go from the hypotenuse to the shortest side? Yeah, we divide by 2. If the short side times 2 goes that way, then this divided by 2 goes that way. So that gives me a 5 there. Now, Mariana, how would I go from the 5 to the x? What would I need to do? Not divide, because it's getting bigger, right? This is getting bigger. This is the shortest side, so I need to do something that's going to make a bigger number. Dividing won't make it bigger. So we multiply by what? By what? Not 2. That would take us to this. I don't want this. I already have that. I want to get x. Multiply by what? This is the relationship you have to remember. There's no other way to figure it out. You got to memorize this. You got to memorize shortest side times 2 goes there. Shortest side times what goes there? Nope. Gabriel, you know? Yes, that's what this was. These are the numbers you use right here. 1, 2, 3. The shortest side times the square root of 3 gives you the x side. So if you say, so in your calculator, you can do it. Say, take the square root of 3. So you get like 1 point, what is that, 1.7 something, I think, maybe?
Why you actually?
I don't know, because you have a calculator. So take the square root of 3, and then whatever number you get, then say times 5, and I'll bet you get 8.66.
8.66.
Because we already figured it out. So you better get 8.66. For practice,
Square root of 3.
that's square root of 3.
It's
Because again,
1.73.
this side, the medium length side,
Mr. Gill,
I don't know how the longest leg, however you want to call it,
Mr. Gill.
when you have a 30, 60, 90 triangle, the longest leg is the shortest leg, the shortest side of the triangle, times the square root of 3. Like, you just got to memorize that. It's the only way to do it.
You said square root of 5.
Square root of 3, right there.
It's 1.7.
So then, well, use all the numbers, don't round it off,
Oh, 1.7.
and then say
32,
times 5. Now say times 5.
Times 5.
That's what you should do. Don't ever, like, the answer's right there. Just say times 5.
It's confusing.
Well, you're in trouble on this quiz. This
You
is
got
one of the
so
problems.
many random things, like none of this is organized.
On that one, you do it. Wait, no, that's a blue one. So you'd hit the square root is the second function. So the second button in the upper left. Then you actually hit the button that looks like this. It says x squared, but if you'll notice up above that, it's got that little symbol there. So that's how you get the square root. Then put in 3 and hit equals. And you should get 1.7 something.
Sure, yeah. It's the new lesson.
Well, yes, and it's also a little bit of review because this particular part's the review.
So
This is on the quiz.
This is, or
Yeah.
then it ain't a new lesson.
Well, what we did before was the new lesson. What we did before was new. Now I'm kind of giving you a little bit of review in between.
Okay, you did all this just you saw for x, correct?
Well, we solved for x 2 different ways. I'm showing
Okay.
you should get the same answer no matter which way you do it.
Just which way is
So, well, there's only one way you can do it on the quiz.
Okay.
You have to
Which
do
way
it
is
this
that
way.
way?
That's what I literally just said. You have to memorize this. There's no other way to do it.
The cos tan thing.
No.
Okay.
This right here, what's still on the board. That right there. Gotta memorize that. No other way to do
And
it.
how am I supposed to remember that? Who are you guys?
Well, you were supposed to be working on it last class when you had time to practice.
I still didn't understand it then.
Well, then you should have been working on it over the weekend.
I still didn't understand it then.
So you worked on it over the weekend?
No. Because I didn't understand it.
Because you didn't work on it.
'Cause I didn't do it.
So if you did it, you would get the same number.
How am I supposed to
1.7 whatever times 5 gives you the 8.66 number. That's the way right there. You have got to do the quiz like that. If I give you a special right triangle that's a 30, 60, 90, there's no other way to do it. Because I don't give you any information about an angle. So even if you understood the new stuff, you wouldn't be able to do it. You just have to understand the shortest side times 2 gives you the hypotenuse. The shortest side times the square root of 3 gives you that side. If you're going the other direction, you would divide by those numbers. So 10 divided by 2 is that. 8.66 divided by the square root of 3 would give you that. It's the only way to do it on the quiz. There was another special right triangle. What was the other special right triangle? Hurry. Why are you just now writing this down? I haven't even written anything new.
Yeah, I know.
I can't, but I can't. Just leave it up. I was going to say, like, that's been up there forever. The other special right triangle.
It's a 45.
I don't know why I didn't finish writing 45. So that was the other special right triangle. What else do we know about that triangle?
Each is like
So we know that it's actually an isosceles triangle. Because of that, we actually don't even need to know the special relationship, like the fast way to solve it. We can do a squared, b squared, c squared here because the two legs are the same length. So if the two legs are the same length, a squared, b squared equals c squared really just becomes that because that's always going to be the same number. So as soon as we get one piece of information and plug it in, we can actually solve it the other way. If you want to use the shortcut, these sides here, which would be the same, multiplied times the square root of 2 is the shortcut. And then if you were going from this side to that, you would divide by the square root of 2. So that's the shortcut if you want to use that. If you have a 45, 45, 90, you can still do a squared, b squared, c squared on those. And then there's two problems. And then there's two problems. That's because if this is the triangle, they're the same.
Yeah, okay.
And then there's two problems that are just right triangles. You just do a squared, b squared, c squared. Those are the two easiest ones by far. And you just solve for the missing side. I give you two sides, you solve for the third side. Just make sure you identify where c is, because we said that was the important size. Important side. So let's start the quiz. 49.
At least 30 minutes for me.
09. All right, so you'll have maybe 10 minutes to look over notes, but we have one more problem we're going to do on the new stuff.
Yeah. And that new stuff is on.
No. So I want you to try to solve for x and y on this problem. They give you a measure of an angle, so that's means you're going to be using either cosine, tangent, or sine based on where that angle is. So that's angle A. So based on the fact that it's angle A, you have to figure out which function to use, whether, depending on whether you are solving for y or whether you're solving for x, figure out which function to use. 12 is what part of that triangle, regardless of what angle you're talking about. 12 is the what?
It's the C.
It's the hypotenuse, because if that's the right angle.
Are you really?
So if that's the right angle, then across from the right angle is the 12, which means 12 is the hypotenuse. So you could go ahead and label that and use that in your formula.
Why is it making it so small? Like, why they could have done so many other ways to make it ramp, but they have to make it so.
Well, ramps actually by law they can't have an angle higher than a certain measure.
I know, but
I didn't even notice this at first, but it explains somewhere over here something about the Americans with Disabilities Act.
Why? This is about math.
It's real life. When
Don't
are we
care.
ever
Be
going to
critical,
use
be
this? This
critical.
is about
I
as
don't
real
care.
life as it gets. Wow, neat.
I'm trying to do
What if somebody
here.
in here has relatives that's in a wheelchair? You don't care about
Well, good luck.
that.
What
Is
you
harsh.
want
That
me
is
to
harsh. Cold. You got a cold heart, Neil.
Good.
Cold heart.
Both
What are you
people.
doing?
You didn't say hi to him.
Are you in trouble right now? I feel like you're in trouble.
Like,
Don't use me to hide from people. Go. Get me in trouble. I'm not going down the ship.
come on, man.
All right, so go ahead, try to figure out x and y real quick. The sooner you get that done, the sooner you can take a few minutes to study for the quiz.
I think
And we'll start the quiz at 10:10.
you could say,
You need to work harder.
wow,
In life, when it's difficult, then you give up. You work harder, right?
you're so good at giving movies.
Hey, I'm a realist. I'm a realist, man. I'm not a pie in the sky.
Please call me
Oh, just be positive. Just think positive thoughts. It'll all work out. No. You need to work.
Call
You
me
need to put some work in,
wholehearted,
then
here
it'll
you
work out.
are.
You put some effort into it, then it'll work out. Not just because you think positive thoughts. That's outdated real life.
Actually,
Didn't
yesterday,
last long.
I actually did work in my biology class.
Oh, a lot of you just don't work. My grade is normally the lowest grade of ever.
Nice.
We just did report cards for all but like 2 students, maybe 3 students. My grade was the lowest grade.
Haha,
But all
you
other
look like
math
a
teachers say
fool.
the same thing. Their grade is always the lowest
make,
grade.
make you look like a fool.
It's because you kids just don't
Maybe I just want to make you look
know
bad.
how to do it. There's like you think Google's gonna solve everything. So.
Yeah.
It does solve everything.
No. Okay, solve this using Google. Well, you can't use Google.
Yeah,
How am I supposed to use Google?
Trust me, it doesn't. First of all, you guys don't even know how to put in Google.
but what we do.
You can't Google this.
There you
You could Google it, show you how to solve it, but you can't
Yeah,
Google
literally,
this.
that's how you solve it. You will
You take a picture of it and then you go to
You
the
can literally
photos
search
and
up
copy
this
and
book and
paste
search
it.
up the.
But it's-
I don't think so.
I think
How are you
that'll
gonna get
work
the teacher's
to be
edition?
it was in the-
But this,
I show me. You bring it in and show me.
it is.
Did you see my phone? I'm not gonna be on it, so I'll show
You
you.
can't, no, don't
Give
take
me
it
your
out,
phone.
don't take it,
No.
he'll take your
I
phone,
have to get it.
he'll take it. Oh my god, you see this? You really
But
wanna
like the
let this
camera's
slide?
the only thing that isn't broken. That wasn't, it wasn't me with my, it was this one. Yeah, it worked.
You just did a thing.
Right, like the 16 sides like right here. Yeah, I guess through it or something. I was downstairs and my other sister was like.
All right, I'll give you another minute or so, and then we'll go over it. And then you can practice those 4 things I just mentioned that are on the quiz. Mainly, I would study the relationships between special right triangles, like what are those numbers you need to know, and then maybe just make sure you know the formulas for the sine, cosine, tangent. I'm about to go over it. Is it just on this?
I think it's about a squared plus b squared, not.
Yeah, the other 2
Yeah,
of
I
them are
would.
just a squared plus b squared.
I understand.
Yeah, that's.
And this, but did you have the angle 60 or did you find it?
Well, we know that's 30.
Yeah,
That's
but what
actually-
if it was a different way? Oh no, we couldn't. But you knew this.
It has, if you're talking about the special relationship, it's only for a 30, 60, 90.
Uh,
All right, so if I know the hypotenuse is 12, I can use any formula that has hypotenuse in it. What are the 2 formulas with hypotenuse?
a squared plus b squared.
Well, but we don't know 2 of the 3 sides, so we can't do
Sine
that.
and Tangent.
So sine, no, hypotenuse. Tangent doesn't have
Oh,
hypotenuse.
the cos
Oh, sine and
sine.
Sine and cosine both have tangent, right? It's the bottom of both of them.
Yeah, I thought
So
you
we
were
can
talking
use
about
sine,
opposite.
Names are so weird.
and we can use cosine. Depends on which one we want to solve for, which variable. So there are my 2 formulas. Which one do you want to solve for first?
Sin.
Cosine.
Who am I going to ask?
Sin.
I'll go with Kaden. Which one do you want to solve for
Don't
first?
pick
X or Y?
Dominic.
X. Let's solve for X first. So if I want to solve for X, relative to where A is, what side is X? Well, what side is it? Is it the adjacent? Is it the opposite? Or is it the hypotenuse? It's adjacent, right? It's right next to it. So relative, this is the part that I told you is the only sort of tricky part. You got to know which formula to use, which means from this angle, from angle A, I've got to figure out what is the relationship to side X. Well, it's not opposite because that would be all the way across. It's not the hypotenuse because that's across from the right angle. So that's the adjacent side. So I need the formula with adjacent, and I need the formula with the hypotenuse. So adjacent and hypotenuse. So I have to use cosine to solve for X. So if I know that I'm using this formula, now I just plug in numbers. So the cosine would be the adjacent, which is the X, over the hypotenuse, which is the 12. That's the proportion. Those are the sides that I'm using. But what else do we know about the cosine of angle A? Lena, what else do we know about the cosine of angle A? What other information do we have about angle A? Well, angle A is 4 degrees. So that's the other information we have. So we're going to use that number and we're going to say, okay, well, I know this is the proportion, but I also know the exact number that the cosine is if I just take that in my calculator and do cosine of 4. So somebody do cosine of 4, please. So cosine of A is the same thing as the cosine of 4, which has to equal x over 12. Because the proportion doesn't change, it's still going to be cosine of that angle is still gonna be x over 12.
0.99.
So 0.99 what? What's after that?
99756.
So now if we solve for x, we would multiply by 12 and multiply by 12. So you'd get a number just barely lower than 12. Like I think it came out to be maybe 11.84 if I remember correctly. If you round it.
11.9707.
That does not sound good. Isn't the answer on the... Oh, I'm sorry, it is. What problem am I thinking of where it was 0.84 then? We may have skipped the problem. I don't know.
You were thinking of y.
Is that what we did the other day? Oh, maybe, yeah, y is 0.84, you're right.
Yeah.
So if you go through and solve for y, if you're solving for that first, you'd have to use opposite over hypotenuse, so you'd have to use this. So you'd say y over 12, you'd take the sine of 4 instead of the cosine of it, set them equal, and then solve for y, and you get 0.84. They show you how to do that. Pretty sure they do that whole problem for you. Yeah, they do it, and then that's how you get that's the answer you get when you solve for y. One quick thing, I want you to do this in your calculator. I told you we didn't want to round off. I'm going to show you why. So in your calculators, do this. I want you to say the sine. Oh, actually, here, we got to do this. Do the second function, hit the sine button, and then put in 0.64. Second function, sine, 0.64.
0.64. 39.79. 18.19.
The light blue one. Say it again. I'm sorry, I wasn't paying
Are you
attention.
serious? 39.77918.
Now, in your calculator,
That's a big number.
do the second function.
They don't seem right.
Now let's say you decide, oh, I'll just round that off to 0.6. Now do that one.
Screwed up.
36.86.
That's a significant difference if you round it too much. 3 degrees on an angle is a big difference.
3, me 4. Is that 6?
I would say it's closer to 3. Actually, less than 3. So when you're taking the sine of a number, actually, we're doing the inverse sine. Actually, we're not taking the sine of it, but when you're trying to figure out the measure of an angle, you don't want to round the sine off to just 1 decimal. Really, you want at least 3 numbers after the decimal, because it will make a difference in your final answer. Especially if it's a multiple choice test, like the EOC will be, you're not going to match up if you do too much rounding. So you need to make sure you put at least 3 numbers after the decimal. I mean, I would just leave the number
All
on
the
there if
time?
you can, and then just do whatever function you need to do.
So,
Use whatever's on the screen.
so always put 3 numbers after the
At
decimal?
least 3, yeah. Again, if it's already on the screen, just keep it on there and do like whatever the next operation is. Times divided
Well,
by.
when you gotta write
whatever.
down, like, you don't want me writing a whole
Well, again,
sentence of
if
numbers.
you want to make sure it's correct, then you need to write down more numbers.
Yeah.
So go ahead, study for 5 minutes again. Just make sure you know the formulas for sine, cosine, tangent. Don't write them down, because if I walk around and I see them on your desk, then that's going to be a 0.
Already wrote down.
Or on your wrists. I used to check students.
Can I use the bathroom?
This one girl one time, I go,
Actually, you don't
show me your
want us to
wrist.
do good.
Huh?
You don't want us to do good.
Mr. Good, I use the bathroom.
This one girl, she
Yo,
I
Mr.
knew
Go.
she was going to cheat.
Mr. Gill.
She goes, hold on just a second. She goes,
Ew.
Yeah.
You're joking.
I knew she was going to cheat too, so I made sure I checked her. Yeah, that's pretty funny.
That's disgusting.
Mr. Gill. What? No?
I said
Can
no.
you use the bathroom?
You got a quiz coming up.
Mr. Gill.
What? Where you got a quiz? Oh wait, no, you do have fun.
Yeah.
Okay, so you can go. Well, actually, do you want to go to the bathroom or do you want to wait?
No.
So,
You almost won. Maybe sit down and come back up. I don't get that.
if you want to do, if you haven't already done it, if you want to do the check problem on 144, it's the exact same thing that's on the quiz for the like setting up the proportions.
You saw that? I don't
So if you
fucking know.
did
I
not,
don't know if you-
did he do something else?
Oh, it's- I came out like this and I put them off like, oh, friends with you,
Yeah, the check problem on 144 is exactly what you're gonna do on the quiz, just
Which
different numbers. Check problem 144. You've already done it. You can do it. You've
Oh,
already
that
done
one?
it.
Hey, I'm gonna say something.
Hey.
You know how they were doing
Whoa.
it?
You did say we get one.
Well, they're better than they were before.
Good, they should be. You get in trouble?
No, I just.
No? How do you not get in trouble for that? I don't get that.
Cause like I don't show.
I wish I could do something about it. Like I said,
Actually,
I'm not gonna be in favor in Vegas.
Are you gonna look at them or no? Do
Oh,
you
right
want to show
now?
you?
I was gonna look later.
Can I show you?
Did you get a message on focus?
I did. Yeah.
Sorry, you're on time.
So what's the motivation? If you did get in trouble.
I'm a white kid, bro.
You said, okay.
Nothing. I just.
You know,
Because you
white
understand.
kid.
Wait, let me show you. I took it yesterday.
I figured that would happen later. I was hoping.
No.
Really wanted that. I was like,
It, something went down, but it went.
Maybe just started.
That went up.
Just
This
keep
was-
keep the momentum going. Don't
But you know how they were like all. That went up.
I mean,
really.
Yeah, I don't
Such
do
an
anything
easy
in that.
class.
I hate that class, but everyone.
This should be a. Yeah, that one should be a lunch cover. No, it's not. All you gotta do is a retake.
All I gotta do, a reason that I don't know.
don't do the
Yeah,
retake.
and
Just
like I
try.
would-
Then I'm gonna get a lower
Like,
grade
I
every
wouldn't
time I
help
do it.
It doesn't play in lower grades,
Yeah,
only the
retake
higher.
can never make the drop. All you'd have to do
It
is
does.
come here and actually
It's a
say exactly what you need. Anybody that comes in, we just tutor just specifically to the quiz.
Stick it up.
When is the lunch?
Right now, only a lunch, but our last flag football game is this Thursday. So after that, I'll have some availability after school also. As soon as flag football.
On Thursday?
Our flag football is this Thursday.
So,
So
like,
after
next
this
week?
Thursday,
So like next week after school.
so starting, now again, you'd have to let me know, because I'm still gonna help with varsity, because their season
Yeah.
goes through, they have district tournament and everything, so I'll help with them.
Please.
But I can still stay in here for a little while
No, please.
to do that. Or if it's a game day, I can stay in here for sure. I swear, if you lose it, I'm not gonna help you. I'm gonna keep on that cycle.
Oh, bank on derivation. Something, almost something, I just need to anything, or how you find out.
You don't have to. Oh, well, now, if you're talking about because it's a 30, 60, 90, is that what you mean, like the ratios?
Like, I don't know what to do first.
So if it's a 30, 60, 90 triangle, so erase the 5. You didn't have that. So for a 30, 60, 90, again, this is just something you have to memorize. For a 30, 60, 90 triangle, there's a relationship between the sides. Meaning if you take this short side and if you multiply it by 2, it will give you the long side. That's just the way a 30, 60, 90 triangle is. It's
Sir,
just-
I need my
that's
phone
just- Because it's a right triangle, because of the measure of the angles, that's just true. No,
So
there's
then-
no explaining it, it's just true.
So then if you divide 10 by 2,
So
then
that's how we got to 5. We said, okay, well, if I would multiply the short side to get the long side, then I would divide to go backwards. Then we said, okay, well, now that I know this is 5,
yeah.
I can find this side because the short side times the square root of 3
Gives you the long.
gives you the longest leg. The longest side is actually that.
Oh.
Because
Long as
we
like-
multiply by 2 to get this.
Yeah.
We multiply by the square root of 3 to get that.
Um,
Or if I would have given you this and you needed to solve for that, you would have divided by the square root. But the relationship between the two legs is the square root of 3.
You would divide by square root of 3 by doing the square root of 3, then.
Well, you don't divide because you have the 5.
Yeah.
You multiply to get, because
No, but if you did, if you had to divide the square root.
Yeah, if you had to go backwards, then you would divide by the square root. All right, we gotta go ahead and get going, so put all your stuff up. Hypotenuse would be on the bottom. And again, whenever you figure out the opposite or the adjacent, it's from where the angle is. So for angle A, which is the opposite side. And so for this one, 16 goes on top, which means that's adjacent. But for angle C, then you have to say opposite is that. So it depends on which angle. You gotta look at it from the angle that they're asking about. Again, if they're asking you about angle A or J or K, like, you have to look from that angle to find the opposite side.
What do you think about
So adjacent, yeah. So adjacent, yeah. All right. What's that? I don't know. Is it not sharpening? Oh, yeah.
Can you sharpen my pencil?
You can come up here.
That's pretty sharp. So you just made me walk up all the way over here?
Well, because I was sharpening his. That's tearing that up. That doesn't work very well in sharpening. It tears that thing up.
Bro, why you have those feet out? That's crazy.
So let's get rid of that, get rid of that, get rid of that. We can leave that up, that's fine. Oh, I'm still recording.
Haha. Record our quiz. So I can see the quiz questions out loud and then have,
No.
I don't
Yep. So again, only 5 questions. I mean, it didn't take the other
Can you
class.
play some jazz music so I can?
No,
No, bro,
please
you
don't.
really
That would
have
totally help.
I cannot
Please
do
don't.
that unless everybody's okay with it.
I am not.
Everyone's okay with Ice Spice, right?
No, screw Ice Spice.
No.
Just saying that because you want on.
All right, that's enough. I'm out over all that back and forth stuff. Quizzes are out for some people, so I know. Yeah.
I'm out of town. Don't go in my house.
You're getting to that point. Remember, once I've told you, at that point, you need to just zip it. Especially when now that I'm giving a quiz out. I got every reason in the world to get you that. Change it.
Yes.
I think it is actually the point. I'm not going to set a timer because I think the other class will finish in like 20 minutes. But if for some reason it starts getting close, one person did work till kind of the end of the hour. I think he also, well, I think he also fell asleep at the beginning of the quiz. So.
Probably me.
Where's my? Oh, let me stop the recording.
No.